Hi, everyone. My name is Joey, and welcome to the Dubsado walkthrough webinar. We really appreciate you joining us today. If you're brand new to Dubsado, we thank you for coming. And if you are perhaps a seasoned user, maybe you're coming for a bit of a refresher, we appreciate it as well. Do know that the purpose of this walkthrough is just to take a bit of a dive into our program and shed light on the different ways that you can use it, very much dependent on your business process. So I do want to emphasize that there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to use it. It does heavily depend on what you might need out of it. So I don't want anyone to ever think that you need to use every single bell and whistle. Our goal really is to help you identify those handful of tools, maybe a bit more, that will save you some time or provide the most value or perhaps make things as efficient as possible. So take everything with a grain of salt. I really do hope you're able to take a few gems from this, and hopefully this will be a great starting point for those who are new and a great refresher for those who have had a little bit of exposure to Dubsado. But either way, we really do appreciate you taking some time with us. I can't wait to dig in. Awesome. So what you are all seeing now is what we call our Dubsado dashboard. And before I sort of kind of navigate through this screen, I wanted to actually go ahead and break down Dubsado into three sort of bigger categories. So the first is always what we would call client management. Whether you are a bespoke product business, whether you offer some sort of service, whether it's recurring or otherwise, the client management portion of our suite really just helps to organize things. So as you work with perhaps the same people over time, or maybe you have the privilege of booking business with the same clients, having that one solidified folder can really help to just sort of make sure everything is in its place and it's not too difficult to find when you need it. The second are deliverables. So pretty much anything that you might exchange with your client. This could be emails, of course, invoices, contracts, any types of forms or documents that you need to send. And then lastly, we'll talk a bit about scheduling and calendaring, as well as what we call workflow automation. So whether you have a bit of a process at the moment or you're building it currently, if there is any bit of that you feel there's too much admin work, maybe you want to alleviate some of that admin pressure as work builds up, that is most definitely the intention of workflows. So if there is that process there, we can perhaps put that into autopilot so you can focus on doing the core part of your job that you enjoy without sweating, let's say, thank you emails or follow-ups and things of that nature. So yeah, before I dig in again, please know nothing is set in stone. Everything is very much fluid and according to what you might need from it. So do just keep that in mind, and I really do hope you enjoy. So just to get this part out of the way, I do want to note that anytime you are putting a client into the system, they are considered projects. And projects is just an internal term. And as a project, there is always going to be two default categories. So we have what we call lead projects. So in this case, it might be some sort of prospect or individual or company that's interested in your services or products, but they have yet to purchase. They're just kind of shopping around, but they have reached out or expressed interest. And then, of course, we have our job projects, which are on the right-hand side here. These are our fully booked clients, and whatever that happens to mean, whatever your conversion process is totally fine. So perhaps in some contexts, it could be, let's say, like a contract signed, a deposit paid, maybe both. So whatever that might be, even if your conversion process changes over time, you'll be in really good shape as long as you keep in mind that leads and jobs are just two types of a project. So what you're all kind of seeing right now is what we call our project dashboard. And this is sort of like your top-down view of everyone that you're currently dealing with. So in sort of the lead category, these are people that you're actively nurturing to potentially become a client. And then the job projects are your full-blown clients, whatever that might entail. So if not for anything else, I do want to iterate that when you're just kind of digesting and making sense of your daily workload, there are a couple ways that you can just sort of filter through it. So if not for anything else, you can absolutely just kind of scroll through your list, or you can search somebody's business or personal name in that search bar. However, There are two optional, completely optional ways that you can navigate and filter if you'd like a little bit more context. And one of them is actually, I suppose it kind of look like tiles, but at the very top of this project dashboard are what we call project statuses. These are entirely customizable, and they're actually meant to iterate a bit of a process timeline. So if you care to track things, I would say in more of a linear fashion, if you have stages of progress where you would very much like to identify where people are at in the mix, you can 100% create these statuses and then determine what might move them essentially from left to right, converting from lead to job and so on. So you'll notice that these statuses themselves have their own numbers that are associated. So if I were to actually click on them, it will specifically isolate people in that particular status or step or stage. So yeah, those are the project statuses, and you can fully customize that only if it helps. If it's not too helpful or if you feel like it's too much to manage, I don't want you to think that it's mandatory. But another way that perhaps could provide some context is something that we call tags. So it doesn't sound all that fancy, but tagging is something like a label or an identifier. So in your business, if you have like different types of clientele, for example, you can use these tags as a way to determine traits and characteristics that are really important for you to log. So for example, if I was a photographer, and let's say I did like a mixed bag of photography, I did like headshots, I did wedding or newborn or whatever it might be. At that point, if I wanted to, let's say, differentiate the different types of shoots that I'm providing, I'll have the ability to apply these tags to my projects and use that as a way to filter and navigate based on my own criteria. So if I wanted to see, okay, at the current moment, how many of my booked jobs or projects are wedding specific or otherwise? And I do want you to know you can actually apply multiple tags to your projects. So if you needed to get even more specific, you can actually filter by two or even multiple tags to just kind of narrow down what you're looking for, especially if you're constantly building your list of clients or potential clients. So something that I would note apart from that is these projects and this dashboard of sorts is something that is very much your current view. So people that you might have archived, or let's say you're done working with them or anything of that nature, at that point you will find them in the address book, which I will address in just a bit. But do know that, for example, if you are a designer and you have the opportunity to work with companies on multiple occasions, you will have a bit of a backlog for that, and you'll have the ability to actually essentially create multiple projects for the same client, if that makes sense. So I'll go ahead and I'll dig into the address book in just a bit. I would honestly say that the majority of the time you'll spend in the software is actually just toggling between the projects themselves. But before I show that to everyone, I wanted to run by some of these templates, and hopefully we can determine what might be useful for you. And I definitely want to start with forms. But before I dig in, I do want you to know that if some of these forms are not necessarily applicable, or if you don't really feel like it fits in your process, that is totally fine. I just want you to know that they're here. And as a bit of a baseline, they are all cloud-based. So do know very much that it's just like a Google Drive or a Dropbox file. In no way do you need to save it to a hard drive in order to access these, and you can absolutely do so on your phone, whatever device you're on. But second to that is customization. So especially if you are very keen on maintaining your branding, you want to make sure that all of your personal brand and aesthetic translates properly. Hopefully there's enough in this arsenal for you to do that. You can absolutely add your own logos and fonts and colors, pictures, even video content if necessary. So just know as you're sort of building these documents, this is a very big priority for us, for you to be able to make sure that your brand is translated and represented as well as possible. I do want to note that there's no co-branding, so there's nothing that outwardly says like powered by Dubsado or something of that nature. So first and foremost, this is actually an example of a digital contract template. And how it sort of goes with every single form that you might create, you'll see that, well, typically this will be a bit of a blank slate, but you'll see on the right-hand side that there are these elements that you can essentially drag and drop. The only difference there is you'll just sort of determine what is necessary for certain documents. So if I'm working, for example, with a contract, I'll have like a logo, I'll have my terms and conditions perhaps, and then at the very bottom, I'll have that signature field, which I do want to iterate is completely legally binding electronically. So I'll show everyone a live example of this, but if you were to send your contract from Dubsado, and let's say your client pulls it up on their iPhone and they sign it, they can absolutely do so without ever having to print or scan or anything like that. So if you're currently using, let's say, a third-party document software like DocuSign or HelloSign or PandaDocs, this does actually replace that function, just in case you were wondering. And you can make use of this in any which way you'd like to. One thing I do like to point out is it's optional that you put that counter signature field. If it's not typical in your industry where you would need to countersign, that's totally fine. But in the scenario that you did and you were to go ahead and add another signature field for you to sign as a business owner, at that point, what happens is as soon as your client signs the contract, you'll be notified, of course, via email and dashboard alert. But once you go in on the back end and you actually countersign that, I just want everyone to know that you do not need to send a revised copy. So at that point, the copy and the version that your client already has will just update automatically. So do know that. So that was a contract. By the way, if you don't use a contract currently, this is not us saying you have to. So feel free to ignore it if it doesn't feel like it's something that's necessary for you. I do really want to make sure everyone knows that. So in another way, we do have a different type of legal document, if you will, called a sub-agreement. And the best way to explain this is it's almost like a catch-all legal document. If you ever find yourself in this scenario where you just generally feel better if someone signs off on something, knock on wood, it could be like a cancellation, it could be an amendment or an addendum, or let's say you worked in photography or design or anything like that where you would typically want to use this for a design proof. Or let's say you worked with confidential info and you needed it for like a non-disclosure agreement. So do know there's no wrong or right way to use the sub-agreement, but it is absolutely there for you. So there's no actual limit to the amount of quote-unquote legal documents you can send to your client. So yeah, those are the only two, I would say, form templates that would naturally have a signature component. And this next one is something that we call a questionnaire. So we actually have two forms that feel a bit similar in terms of templates. One of them is this one, a questionnaire, and then the other is something called a lead capture form. That lead capture, which I'll talk about in just a few moments, is sort of that initial intake form. At that point, you're probably just gathering some really basic info like first name, last name, email, maybe phone number, and then inquiry type. So something like a questionnaire, if you feel like this helps part of your process, the entire goal for using this is to gather all the nitty-gritty details of what you might need from someone. Whether you're gathering background info or maybe you're just scoping out their preferences, or let's say you're an event planner and you need them to specify all the details about, the event itself and what they're anticipating, stuff like that. Let's say you're a coach or a consultant and you are using this as a bit of a vetting form to just kind of evaluate if the client is the right fit. You can use this in a lot of ways. And the reason why I'm showing everyone a floral designer one, is because I want to illustrate how robust it can be. Apart from designing it, because mind you can absolutely kind of deck this out with your branding and stuff like that, you can be very particular about how you are collecting information. So do know on something like a questionnaire, you can determine, are some questions required? Are some of them optional? And then on top of that, perhaps is it, a short answer question? Is it a long sort of paragraph where they're explaining something? Are they telling you any significant dates or checking boxes, hitting yes or no, that type of thing? And two things I would mention that are very common with a questionnaire is, one, they can save their progress or whoever your client might be. As a good example, let's say you are an event planner or a wedding planner, and the bride and the groom would need a little bit of time to just kind of discuss their preferences. If they need to, they can absolutely save their progress, sleep on it, and then come back to it when they're ready to finish the rest. And the second, I do want to point this out, although I don't want to make it seem like it's mandatory. There is a file uploader. So this is actually intended for your clients and just anything that you might need to request from them. It could be photo references, it could be photo inspo, it could be spreadsheets or any kind of miscellaneous documents that might be helpful for them to attach. This is 100% intended for your clients. So if you know at some point you're already going to ask for those types of attachments, this is a great way to just kind of kill two birds in one stone, if you will, and have them answer questions, but also provide some supplemental info, whatever it is you might need. So that's the questionnaire. And I promise I only have 2 more forms, and then we'll go ahead and dive into the rest of the software. Oh, and if you're wondering, our team will be answering the questions via chat, as well as towards the end. We'll try to make sure that we have as much time to just kind of dig through the software, and we will actively be answering your questions in the chat. I did want to note that. So the next sort of form template is something that we call a proposal. And this proposal, for better or worse, I think the best way to put it is that it's like a visual order sheet or a shopping cart. So if you have a service or let's say a bespoke product that you pretty much have, let's say, flat rate pricing, or you have certain a la carte item selections you'd like someone to choose from, a really good way to just kind of iterate this is, let's say I'm a graphic designer and I have like a base rate package for my design. But on top of that, I might have some a la carte features, some add-ons that I would upsell perhaps for an additional fee. So the whole concept is if I was to send a proposal over to my client, it would actually allow them to select as well as quantify anything that they are willing to purchase. So the big thing there is knowing that this itself will create the invoice. By the way, if you deal in an industry, for example, where the price is determined by the quantity per se, you can absolutely put a quantity box there, whether it's labor hours, whether it's hours for a second shooter, whether it's a certain type of product. You can put those quantity boxes where needed, and you can even indicate if there is a minimum or a maximum order amount. So that is the biggest perk of the proposal. It's just kind of a nice visual where people can freely sort of choose and quantify what they want. And as an added perk, if you feel like this is going to help your process or you wanted to just make things as easy as possible for your client, you do 100% have the option to connect the contract as well as the invoice to the proposal. So if it's not too much hand-holding involved, if it's pretty turnkey, I would say, you can absolutely send a proposal to a client. Let's say they've already identified they want to book your services. You just want to move them forward. With this proposal of sorts, they can essentially choose what they would like, sign the contract, which details what they chose, and then as a final measure, in order to just kind of seal the deal, if you will, they will then pay some sort of monetary amount. It could be like a deposit of sorts, or it could be the entire sum. But that is a great way to just kind of tackle those 3 items up front without having too much friction or back and forth. And I'll definitely show everyone an example of this. One thing I will note, especially with something like a proposal, is I realize that not everyone's services are cut and dry like that. There might be a lot of curation or hand-holding. So if you're in a situation where you often need to change, let's say, offerings or pricing or description or anything like that, you can absolutely build what we would identify as a master proposal. So let's say you had a master proposal that was sort of all-encompassing, that covers all the bases. Because what you can do at that point is you can take the proposal and you can put it into a project and make client-specific edits. So if I was to take, let's say, my wedding photography proposal and I was to plop it into my project for John and Amy's wedding, at that point, if I need to change anything that's specific for John and Amy, it is only affecting and applying changes to their proposal. So I do want you to know any changes whatsoever that you make within a project will not overwrite your master template. So hopefully, if not for anything else, even if there is some curation involved or if it's not as black and white as other services might be, at the very least, you know, you can just kind of edit down from a master proposal instead of having to build, let's say, like a brand new proposal for every client. So yeah, that is the proposal. And then last but not least, in terms of forms, is what we call a lead capture page, which quite honestly is just a funky way of saying contact page. So what this is it's meant to supplement your primary contact area wherever it might be. So if you do, for example, have a website, let's say there is currently a contact page on your website, and you could be using like Showit or WordPress or Squarespace or Wix. The idea is we would actually replicate what that looks like automatically within Dubsado. And then we would actually take this version of it and we would embed this on your website. So the concept is there's no material difference on the client end. It would look the same exact way as if someone were to have visited your website prior. But the sort of benefit of it is instead of having to take someone's info, let's say in an email, and then spend the time to type it into Dubsado, you'll still get the email so you know someone came, but at the same time, it'll create a new lead project for you. So it's really just about saving that sort of legwork, and you know that any person that inquires will never be sort of forgotten, and everyone's accounted for. So you might be wondering as well, hey, perhaps I have a website, or even if I don't, a lot of people tend to get inquiries in all sorts of other ways. Let's say it is a referral call, a text message, an email, an Instagram DM, or a Facebook message. There is very much a direct link that you can customize and share. And this is just kind of like a plain text URL. So the way that you would share, let's say, a link to a YouTube video, for example, is how you can share this link. So, you can absolutely put this, let's say, on your Instagram profile or LinkedIn or Pinterest, wherever it might be. But it's also just something great that you can save to your phone. So if you get a lot of referral business, let's say, you can just copy and paste this link from your Notes app and you can text or email it to someone. It really doesn't matter how someone fills it out, but if they do, it'll save you the time and it'll absolutely create that lead project for you so you do not have to worry. So with that, I do want to just, point out a third scenario where you can use this. If you are someone that attends live events, maybe it's a conference, maybe it's an expo, anything of that nature, you're not tied to only one type of lead capture page. You can create as many as you might need for various purposes. So even if there's few different calls to action on your website, or let's say you were creating an event-specific landing page where maybe you were a speaker at the event, or you're setting up a bit of a booth at an expo, you can actually create one specific to that event and perhaps even pull it up even, let's say on like an iPad, and then have people fill it out. It'll put them in the system, and then it can refresh to the blank page for your next potential client. So I do want you to know there's a lot of ways you can use a lead capture page, all sort of pointing in the direction of just making sure they're accounted for in the system. A couple things on forms before I move on. I know that was a mouthful. We offer free services. So I do want to point out as well that if you have documents that are intended for, let's say, signing or filling out in any capacity, whether it's created in another CRM, whether it's a PDF or a Word doc or a Google Drive file, we offer a free service where you can actually send us up to 10 of your existing forms, and we'll just recreate that for you while you're on trial. The only purpose for that is to save you the time and the legwork. So it's completely optional, but I do want everyone to know that that option is there, just so you have some good pieces to work with without having to spend too much setup time. So if you're at all interested in that, you can send them to forms, FORMS, @dubsado.com. And let's say in a different scenario, you would love to create some of these forms, but you want a bit of a baseline. Like you don't want to start from ground zero, so to speak. I'm very much this way because I'm not the most design-oriented, let's say. We do have a template library, and this is completely open source. You'll find that there are user-submitted templates from different industries. And whatever it is you might like about a form, whether it's the formatting, the colors, or however which way it's sort of designed, you can copy any of these to your account, and you can sort of edit your branding, of course, and just sort of use it at your own accord. So I want you to know that you can use this as a baseline in case you found it handy. Even if, you love all the questions that were provided, you just need to sort of rebrand it. That is totally okay. I just want everyone to know that this is a free resource, and you can copy any one of these to your account as needed. So the other template that I do want to point out is something called canned emails. This is just a weird way of saying email templates. So do know, if you have any emails that you send very, very often, it could be like thank you emails, check-ins, reminders, anything of that nature, it would definitely benefit you to create these canned emails or email templates because it serves kind of a dual function. The first is, even if you were to just queue up an email to send manually, at that point, at least you don't have to type out every single word. You can very much just kind of choose that email template and then send it off. And then in another case, when we're talking about workflow automation, these are sort of the building blocks that you would use to put together things that are pretty much fully automated for you, which I'll definitely talk about in just a bit. So before I actually take everyone into that project page, which is really where a lot of the information lies and where you'll be spending the majority of your time, I wanted to point out something called packages. The phrase packages, I want to clarify, it might be a little misleading. Sometimes when you say the phrase packages, you might think that it's a bulk service or a bulk product, for example. But I want to iterate that these are very much sort of like line item templates or building blocks for an invoice or proposal. So all that to say, you can create quote-unquote packages that are not a bulk service. Any type of a la carte service or product you might offer, please do go ahead and create those as packages as well, because those are the components you would use to sling together an invoice really quickly or sort of put it onto a proposal. So I just want everyone to know, if you have that sort of flat rate pricing or if pricing is set in stone and the only thing you really change, let's say, is tax or quantity or anything like that, having those packages can save you a lot of time when you're putting together anything invoice related, and it does not have to be a bulk service. So finally, I am okay to show everyone the project page. And I can't iterate enough that once you have most of your templates sort of set up, however long that might take, the majority of the time you'll spend is 100% in the project pages themselves. So the way this works is, if I was to go, for example, to your Instagram page and I clicked on your contact page from Dubsado, if I were to go ahead and fill that out, push submit, even if you have yet to speak with me, there's already a project page here that looks exactly like what you would see. So just know that at any point in time, if you do get an inquiry, even if you have yet to speak with me, there's a project page that is building already for you, so you know where to locate everything. So from that point on, we just want to make things very easy to manage and visible. So at any point in time, in this example, my client's name is Drew. If I needed to check in on Drew or monitor progress or send a recap or anything like that, I just kind of know right off the bat that if I go to Drew's project, that's where I'll find all of his info, because everyone else's information is within their project. So a good way to iterate that is actually connecting your email, for example. And it doesn't matter what email host you might use, unfortunately, except for Yahoo. For whatever reason, Yahoo as a mailer does not sort of work well with Dubsado, but if you have anything short of that, you can connect it to our system. And I want to be clear that it will not fully replace your emailer. So let's say you're using Google or G Suite. You can 100% send and receive as you typically would in Gmail. The only purpose for sort of connecting the email is visibility. So for example, if you are in a really busy season of life and you're just taking on a bunch of different inquiries, instead of having to dig through your inbox or create a bunch of subfolders, it's very much like, okay, I need to follow up with Drew. So if I just go to Drew's project, I'm only seeing the emails between our company or myself and Drew. So it's just kind of a nice way to have that email correspondence organized, and you'll never have to worry about where you might find it. I do want everyone to know, by the way, that it's not going to strip your actual email itself. So it's not going to say like, Joey or Amy at Dubsado Mailer. It'll very much be the exact email that you connect, and you can absolutely format the emails accordingly with regard to, font preferences, formatting, as well, of course, as the signature that you might create. So that's something that you can sort of hash out preemptively. So anytime you send an email, it looks brand appropriate and essentially no different from what you might have sent in your traditional mailer. One small tidbit I did want to point out, knock on wood, hopefully no one actually needs this, but I do want to note that it exists, is we do have read receipts. So just in case someone's a little bit hard to get a hold of or something like that, do know that there is a read receipt so you can identify and confirm if someone has opened your email, just in case you want to, let's say, give a follow-up call or a follow-up email or something of that nature. So the other tab that you'll be interacting with quite often within the project is the form tab. So do know that I haven't actually navigated outside of the forms, or the project page rather, and all I did was I clicked on this forms area, and all you'll do to actually send a form is you'll click on this drop down menu, which will show you your list of templates. This is actually built from the area that I showed everyone earlier, so this is where those are pulling from. So for example, if I wanted to go ahead and add a questionnaire to this area, I'll just go ahead and I'll click on whichever one, and I'll see it populate as a tile. So just know that adding it to the actual project does not send it automatically. So if you'd like to, just for kind of clarity's sake, or to make sure that you don't forget anything, you're more than welcome to, queue up the documents that you want to save over time and just kind of store it there so you know it needs to be sent at some point. But the idea is, if I was to, let's say, scroll over this questionnaire and push the send button, you'll see this email box pop up. This is a very, let's say, generic example, but you can absolutely deck things out. And the concept is, as soon as you send it to your client, the only thing that they are then responsible for is clicking on that button, and then it will take them to a new window in their browser to just kind of fill out and submit when they're ready. So I do want you to know that they don't need any sort of complex login. They don't need any kind of app. All they do is they click on the link in the email, and then they fill it out in the new web window that is open for them. With that said, there's a couple of things I want to point out about this area. You might notice that there are these color-coded statuses, and I want to note that each form itself has its own tracker, if you will. So you can actually see, okay, when did I send this form? When did they last open it? And then when was it completed? So you'll actually find the document when it's completed in the same exact place that you sent it. And the only indicator of that are sort of these color-coded statuses that say sent, need sending, view, and completed. If you're someone that does any sort of in-person sales, by the way, and you feel like it would be beneficial to have a hard copy or anything of that nature, I do want you to know that although things are cloud-based, you can 100% print and download these as PDFs if you'd like to. Or let's say, instead of sending someone an intake form, you're going to see them in person, you can absolutely pull this up on like your laptop or an iPad and sit next to them or help them and guide them as they fill it out on your device. So I don't want you to think there's a wrong or right way to do that, and you can absolutely print it, and your client can as well if they prefer like a PDF or a desktop copy. This is also the place, last thing, that you can edit your forms. So let's say, for example, you're sending out, let's say, a questionnaire, and you want to add or remove a few different questions, or you need to tweak some wording or anything of that nature. All you're really doing at that point is you're scrolling over that document and you're pushing the edit button. So what's nice about this is if you are editing any form within a project, this is the surefire way of knowing that you are not in any way overwriting your master template or any forms that this might, or any projects that have this form as well, if that makes sense. So yeah, those are sort of your form templates. I do actually want to show everyone an example of a proposal. If everyone can remember earlier, I mentioned that one of the perks of a proposal is you have the ability to actually attach the contract as well as the invoice, completely optional. You can attach one or the other or both. And this is actually a live representation of what somebody would see if they were to, let's say, click on a proposal button in an email and then open it up in a new window. So let's say, I am your client and you sent me your proposal and I'm absolutely ready to go. I just want to kind of seal the deal and then move forward. I'll have the opportunity to sort of scroll through the proposal, select and quantify everything that I would like. And then as a second measure, in the same window, there's a second tab that says contract. So this is where I can see everything I've chosen. I can initial if I need to and then sign. And then lastly, which I'll talk about just in a bit, is the invoice. So if there is, for example, a 35% or 50% deposit upon signing, I can go ahead and I can accommodate that payment right off the bat so I have everything good to go. So if efficiency is your number one priority and you feel like this would help, this is a great way to just kind of get all the essentials out of the way, if you will. And this is an exact replica of what it would look like on the client end. Speaking of invoicing, I realize that invoicing is a very nuanced thing, especially depending on the country or region that you're in. There's a lot of different invoicing or payment collection practices, things like that. I do just want to note that regardless of what country you're in, you can absolutely use Dubsado's invoices in a few different ways. We are integrated with a few processors like PayPal, Square, and Stripe. So if anyone at all was to actually use PayPal, Square, or Stripe and use their credit card, the transaction fee is the exact same across the board. I do want you to know that it is all sort of a 2.9% fee plus 30 cents per transaction, and that is solely taken on behalf of the processors themselves. So we do not in any way take on any additional fees. We don't tack on anything extra. I do want you to know that. But one of the perks that I would mention has specifically to do with Stripe. I really do wish that this was available outside of the US. So if you're in Canada or Asia or the UK, Australia, I'm so sorry. But Stripe offers something called e-checks. And basically it is kind of like a bank deposit or an ACH deposit, if you will. Let me go ahead and iterate what I mean. So let's say you were to charge somebody, let's say $1,200 for your services, and 2.9% of $1,200 is still quite a bit of money to just kind of eat as a transaction cost. So if you had the ability to, and you were to provide them with a Stripe e-check payment method, what that is it's directly from their bank to yours, and when they go ahead and they pay, the transaction fee itself is 0.8%, but it's capped at $5. So no matter how large the invoice sum might be, if they're paying via e-check within the U.S., unfortunately, only, then you're never paying more than $5 in terms of a transaction fee. And probably my favorite part about this is instead of having to, let's say, use your account and routing number or sort of fetch that wherever you've, unless you've memorized it, which I have not, but, instead of doing the traditional way of making a wire transfer, let's say, paying via e-check is very similar to logging into your online mobile banking app. So let's say, for example, I'm with Navy Federal. I would use the exact same login as I would on my mobile app to actually go ahead and make a payment to you from my bank to yours. So in terms of ease of use, I would say this is a great option for your clients. And then if they do go ahead and they pay this way, it will definitely save you some money in terms of transaction fees. Apart from that, I actually don't want to rule out the possibility that there are other ways someone might want to pay. In the U.S., maybe it's Venmo, or they just want to cut you a check. Or let's say you're in Canada or Australia and they want to make like an EFT or something of that nature. If there is a form of payment that you accept that is not necessarily connected or it's not online, it is perfectly okay to actually still use the invoice. What happens there is, let's say you send someone a bill for $500 and they go ahead and they say, okay, I'm going to mail you a check for that amount. At that point, the only thing that you need to do is you'll go ahead and you'll click apply payment, and then all you're doing is specifying the method, the amount, and then the date received. The biggest thing there is knowing that the invoice is live. So luckily, let's say you need to make some last minute changes that cause you to increase the price. Maybe you're giving them some sort of discount, or in this case, you might just be applying an external payment source. At that point, you never need to worry about sending a revised copy of the invoice. It'll always update with the most current changes you might have made. So do know that everyone will be on the same page with any changes you make, whether it's automatic or manually done. If you have a bit of a breakdown, let's say you have a service you provide and you would like to then give the client the ability to pay 50% up front and then let's say 50% at a later date. A good example of this is, let's say you are a graphic designer, 50% of the total, let's say, is due up front, and then the remaining balance is due a week prior to, let's say, project completion. You can absolutely sort of iron that out ahead of time. So payment schedules are actually something that you can create a template for, and you can iterate right off the bat, like, okay, just to get the ball rolling, I'm going to go ahead and need that 50% down. And then based on when the project completion date is, you can determine when that second payment is due. So do know, if you're breaking down payments, it doesn't mean you're sending separate invoices, but it will actually show them on the one invoice the different payment amounts that are due, and there are even separate pay now buttons for that. So do know you can kind of break things down in any which way you need to, and it can be relative to a completion date or an end date or anything of that nature. But that's definitely something that you can do on one invoice instead of having to splinter that into a few. Last but not least, with invoicing, do know that you can actually create invoice payment reminders. So if you wanted to give, let's say, a courteous reminder, let's say you are a wedding photographer and you just want to make sure they are aware that the final payment balance is due, let's say 30 days prior to their wedding, you can set that up preemptively so the system can automatically note, okay, a week prior to that final payment date, go ahead and send this sort of preemptive payment reminder, and that can be totally done for you. So I did just want to point that out. So yeah, I would say those are the three biggest things, or tabs rather, that you would focus on in the project. But apart from that, I wanted to point out something really quickly. It does not sound that fancy, or look that fancy rather, but it's actually a notes section. So this is sort of like your safe space. If you have any internal notes about clients, whatever it might be, this is a nice way to know that you can log whatever you need to, and it's in the appropriate area, and it is only for your eyes. At no point will your client ever be able to see your internal notes. So shifting gears a little bit from sort of the general project area, I do want to point out that we do have a calendar, and this is first and foremost an internal calendar. So anything at all that has a time frame or a due date, that'll be on your calendar by default if it's from within Dubsado. But you do have the ability to connect an external calendar. Let's say you're using Outlook or Google or Apple even. If you already are very much used to using like your phone calendar, let's say, you can 100% connect that so you can see things in both places and just kind of have that ease of use, if that makes sense. Right under the calendar tab is a tasks tab. And this is sort of like a virtual to-do list, if you will. If you're someone that likes creating checklists or anything of that nature, this is very much a way that you can do that. And just know that whenever you're creating a to-do item within Dubsado, there are sort of specifications that you can lay out. So you can 100% determine, like, what is it that I'm doing? Does this task have some sort of time frame or due date? If so, you can actually find the task on your calendar. But to take things just a single step further, you can absolutely add files and comments, and if necessary, you can actually indicate, perhaps is this task business, general business, or is it something that's specific to a project? So it could be like something that has nothing to do with the client. Let's say you just need to go to the bank, or if you do indicate that, okay, this task that I'm accomplishing is for a project, you can actually indicate that in the drop down, and then you'll be able to see that task in whoever's project it is as well. So not mandatory, but something that's definitely there. I do have a few more things to show everyone, and I hope everyone's questions are answered. But I did want to just point out, especially since we're a little more than midway through, take everything with a grain of salt. I'm hoping that there is something here for you to just kind of evaluate that you determine is valuable, and hopefully it'll help your business in some way. But at no point are you required to use it. So for example, if you have your own project management or task management suite that you're using elsewhere, At no point are you required to sort of stop using that and use this. There are a lot of common cases where you might have some external software that, for whatever reason, whether it's more efficient or it's industry specific, as long as there's enough within Dubsado that you've identified will save you time and make life easier, that's what we're going for. I don't want you to think that there's a proper way to use it, especially if you're already kind of using tools that are a bit similar to what we provide. So do know sometimes there's that balance, and you might still have a couple other softwares, maybe one or two that you need to use in addition to it. I do actually want to point out the address book. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, I hope I did. Basically, if you have the opportunity to work with clients on multiple occasions, at that point you'll have the ability to create multiple projects for a single client. So do know, like, if you are done working with someone and you're wondering, okay, if I'm on my project dashboard, what happens to that project as soon as I'm, done fulfilling their services? That is actually where it all comes to, this address book of sorts. So even if you are not currently working with, let's say, your client Drew, this is a great way to just kind of reflect on the experience you've had with this client prior. So you can see all the emails you've exchanged, all the forms he or she might have filled out, as well as the projects themselves, which in this case are like the different occasions you might have worked with this person. So do know if something is not on your project dashboard and is not an active client or lead, then they will be found in the address book, and this kind of just aggregates over time. So two things that I wanted to point out is the scheduler and then workflow automation. So this scheduler of sorts is very much a way for you to be able to have your clients book time with you that is compliant with your schedule, but also is not showing them your personal calendar. So do know at that point, if you have, like, let's say discovery calls or consultation calls, or maybe these are like private sessions that you might have privately sent to your clients, this is a great way to just kind of offer your clients a frictionless way to book your time without the back and forth and without having to worry about them seeing, let's say, your private calendar. So as an example, let's say as part of your onboarding process, there is a consultation call involved where you're just kind of helping them assess their needs. Whenever you're setting up a scheduler template on the back end, you can determine things like, how far in advance do they need to book my time? What's my general availability? Is something like this free or is it paid for? Once you kind of determine all those parameters, you'll have two options as to how you can share it. So the same way you're actually sharing a contact page, you can 100% embed this on a website, or just like you would a lead capture or contact page, you can actually just share the direct link itself. So just to show everyone, this is an example of what a scheduler template would look like on a client end. I do want to point out, by the way, if you're someone that works very much virtually, let's say you're a VA or a consultant or anything of that nature, whomever is booking your time, they will see these time slots in their native time zone. So I don't want you to think that you have to worry about time discrepancies or anything like that. But basically what they'll do is they'll see, like, okay, she's available on Thursday the 13th, 9:30 a.m. My time sounds good. And then just based on the requisites that you might create for them, they'll go ahead and they'll fill out and they'll submit what they need to, and they'll automatically get a confirmation email, at which point they can add it to their calendar. They'll see all the booking details, and then they can cancel or reschedule if they need to. So do know, like, you can choose which certain types of schedulers might be private or public, and you can absolutely create different types of scheduler templates if you happen to have, different appointment types naturally. So yeah, do know that that's something that is there. If you've ever used something like Calendly or Acuity, this in some ways will replace that function, but I don't want to say that it's better or worse than them. So I want you to know if there are certain functions, let's say within another scheduler software, that are very important to you, by no means do you have to ditch that and use this. So it really just is. If you feel like it does enough, absolutely, we would love for you to use it. So last but not least, before I wrap up with some resources and things of that nature, I wanted to talk about workflows. So whenever we say the phrase workflows, I realize it sounds kind of obscure. It's just referencing anything that is done on your behalf. So do know, like, if you have a process of sorts, and this is very much dependent on your current process, if you have bits and pieces of, let's say, your onboarding process or your fulfillment process where you feel like there's just too much heavy lifting in terms of admin work, that's where a workflow can step in and hopefully do a lot of that lifting for you. So, for example, let's say I keep using photographers. Let's say you're a photographer, and depending on what type of shoot someone might inquire about, at that point you already kind of know in your head, okay, what do I send to someone if they inquire about a wedding versus a portrait shoot? And there could be an entirely different chain of emails and forms that are specific to those types of inquiries. So let's say in this case, this is my wedding photography onboarding sort of process. What you're seeing here is a list of actions that are really just kind of like a visual representation in your head of what you're doing already. So let's say, for example, I know for a fact that my first thing I'd send is a thank you email. At that point, I would actually go to the first action in the workflow, and then I would click send email. But more so than choosing the action itself, I want to point out that instead of having to fiddle with like dates and times for every single client, we have something called triggers. So this is very much like saying, okay, they filled out this, send this. They pay the invoice, send the questionnaire, or they fill out the questionnaire, send the contract. So based on what you know your process to be, you can actually make sure that things are sent to your client based on the progress that they've made so far. So that is sort of one version of a workflow, and if there's any part of that process you feel like you can sort of set up, then hopefully it'll save you as much time as possible. Another version of a workflow that you can utilize is perhaps more maintenance related. Like let's say you're a wedding planner and the actual wedding itself is not for like 9 or 10 months, and you just want to make sure that you have certain checkpoints, let's say on a monthly basis, to just make sure that people are getting what they need. You can absolutely use the wedding date as sort of your anchor point, and you can then trigger monthly emails to be sent to your client just so you know that if not for anything else, you've reached out once a month to just kind of check in and make sure everything's okay. But the real sort of example I wanted to point out with regard to workflows is you can actually connect that to, oh, computer's fallen. You can actually connect that to the lead capture page. So this lead capture page, also known as the contact page, contains an element that is also called workflow. And I guess there's not really a single name for it, but this is sort of like the question you would ask someone when you just want to kind of determine why they're inquiring. So you could list, for example, a list of your services you're offering. Maybe there's an option to book a call or ask for pricing or more info. Whatever it is you provide as options for your client, you can actually preemptively indicate what workflow will trigger. So basically, if I go to your contact page and I click option A and then I'll hit submit, I'll get an entirely different chain of forms and emails and such from if I were to choose, let's say, B or C. So this is a really nice way of automating what you would typically send to your clients, but also making sure that they're getting materials that are relevant to what they asked you for. So yeah, that is workflows, and those are just a couple examples of how workflows can hopefully save you that upfront time, just in terms of getting people in the system and then sending them what they might need to get the ball rolling. One thing I want to say, just kind of as a wrap up, is it does take some time to sort of evaluate what you might need from Dubsado. However little or much it might be, I wanted to emphasize that support is our biggest priority. So for example, if you have yet to create a trial, or even if you're on a trial currently, do know that the trial itself is not time restricted. Take as much time as you need to sort of dig into it and evaluate what is important to you and you specifically. It might grow over time, or you might add more layers or use more functions over time. But our goal really is to just help you find that really delicate balance of making things easy to manage, but also saving you as much time as possible without setting up too many things. So yeah, again, if you are brand new to Dubsado, I hope this was extremely helpful. If you are just having a bit of a refresher, I hope you were able to pick up on little tidbits here and there. Support again is our number one priority. So in whichever way you're comfortable, I just wanted to quickly list off the different ways that you can reach us. Without a doubt, the quickest turnaround and the most comprehensive support is our chat support. Our customer support team are really like the backbone of our service. They work nearly round the clock. So if you are an early riser or a late sleeper or anything like that, you can chat with them at 9 p.m. or 6 in the morning or something like that. I don't want you to think that there aren't resources available if you are working in sort of off business hours, if you will. We also have a really, really dense library of help articles, tutorial videos, and things of that nature, as well as a team that is called Account Solutions. And let's say you are in the process of putting together your account. Let's say you've put together some workflows or whatever it might be, and you need someone to just give it a good, honest look and sort of audit that or help you kind of tweak it and make sure it works properly. Those are the things that an account solutions call can do, and those are completely free as well. You can actually book, I think, 1 or 2 a month with that team, and they're more than happy to kind of sit with you and then help you assess your process and help tie everything together and connect all the dots. So yeah, the biggest thing I want to mention is support always is available, regardless of where you're at, regardless of if it's your first day using Dubsado or if you use us for months or years. And lastly, we have a sale going on. I do want you to know that during this sort of sale week, we will be offering a reduced price on our monthly and our monthly and annual plan. So the monthly will be reduced from $35 to $30 US, and the annual will be reduced from $350 to $300, and that is recurring. So for however long you're with us, you will most definitely be locked in at that sale price. So yeah, that is currently going on for this entire sale week. Thank you so much. I know I threw a lot of info at everyone, but I appreciate you sticking with me. I hope we can get to all your questions, and I hope you all have a great rest of your month and 2020.